down the numbers. We've got you covered based on the numbers with your incredible host, Bahiyah Shabazz, based on the numbers.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Based on the Numbers. I am your host, Bahiyah Shabazz. It has come to my attention that there is some news that we need to discuss. In case you have not heard, the returning President Trump in his presidency has signed a plethora of executive orders. One of the orders is the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. Now, today we're talking about jobs and justice. Just so happened, he actually signed this executive order to dismantle the EEOC of 1965. For those of you who are not familiar with this, let me pull it up so that I can read to you exactly what it is. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits discrimination in a broad array of private conduct, including public accommodations, governmental services, and education. One section of the act, referred to as Title VII, prohibits employment discrimination based on race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. Title VII applies to private employers, labor unions, and employment agency, right? The act prohibits discrimination in recruitment, hiring, wages, assignment, promotions, benefits, discipline, discharge, layoffs, and almost every aspect of employment. We're in trouble. We are in trouble. Mayday, mayday, everybody. Why am I saying this? Now, today I'm actually talking about jobs and justice, talking about the unemployment rate, the national unemployment rate. My intention is to pull to see what President Trump did in his previous presidency compared to what he's going to do right now. So before we get, actually, it's not even before, I'm just going to include the Employment Equal Opportunity Act of 1965 in this conversation as I discuss the unemployment rate that occurred during President Trump's first administration and from 2017 to 2021. Because we do not know what we're going to receive. However, he's letting you know. He's letting you know. A lot of us were very concerned about Project 2025. He said he had nothing to do with it, but you're coming in the door saying that, listen, we are not an equal employment opportunity around here. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. Essentially, that's what he's saying. He's not saying that he's for the people, right? Your actions are speaking louder than words. Your actions are speaking louder than words, sir. So we need to figure out what exactly we are going to do during this particular presidency. But before we get into that, let me go ahead and mention to you what I intended to begin with, and that is the record low unemployment rates. Now, we're going to talk about the unemployment rates as well as state minimum wages. All of that coincide with this Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. Now, let's take it back a step. During Trump's first presidency, I want to hone in on 2019. The reason why I want to hold in on 2019 is because we all know that when presidents come in, they inherit factors, right? And those inherited factors basically say you inherit what the previous president encountered, what they left. And then we're going to talk about what actually was achieved factors. So the reason why I am not really honing in on 2017 and 2018 is because, again, President Trump inherited the economy from President Obama. Around 2019, we started really seeing things. 2020, we saw that C word coming in. So I'm going to say that was not his controlling somewhat, right? He was able to control what we were able to do or not to do during that time, but he had no indication of what was going to occur as far as the C word is concerned. So when we look at 2019, there are a few months that I want to look at. August, September, as well as April. And in August of 2019, the unemployment rate in the United States was at 3.7%. Now, we always hear economic indicators, right? GDP, gross domestic product. We hear about unemployment rate. The list goes on and on as far as economic indicators are concerned. Right now, this economic indicator that I want to talk about is unemployment rate. And quite often we hear the praise or no or not about how the unemployment rate is occurring at the time. And of course, if it's low, it's kudos, president. If it's high, not so much kudos, president. But what people do not factor in is yes, there is a national unemployment rate. But when we break it down as far as African Americans, Hispanics, and women, has a lot to do with this Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. Let's look at it, right? Let's break it down so it can forever be broken. With that being said, in August of 2019, the national unemployment rate was 3.7%. However, for African Americans, the unemployment rate hit a record low of 5.4%. Now, you may say, wait a minute, record low? Bahiyah, didn't you just say the national unemployment rate was 3.7%? And I did. But people are not taking in consideration when you break out subgroups within the group, there is some work that needs to be done. And although the national unemployment rate was at 3.7, African Americans were at 5.4%. Now we look at September of 2019, the national unemployment rate was at 3.5%. Hispanics were at 3.1%. I'm sorry, 3.9%. Right? So you had your national unemployment rate at 3.5, Hispanics are at 3.9, and then African Americans are at 5.4%. Now, let's take it back a little bit. In April 2019, the unemployment rate was 3.6%. However, if we look at women, the overall unemployment rate for adult women dropped to 3.1% in April 2019. So it was slightly below the national unemployment rate. But why is there a disparity when it comes to these national unemployment rates compared to African Americans, Hispanics, and women? We need to discuss that. But I'm really concerned as I look over here in my monitor and I'm reading about the Civil Rights Act and what it entails. Everyone does not understand what the Civil Rights Act entails. Now, initially, it was created for African Americans, but once Lyndon B. Johnson got involved, he included others as well, including women, Caucasian women, white women, who benefited the most from the EEOC Act of 1965. So I'm really concerned with what is going to happen moving forward. What I mean by that is we see right now that a lot of Black women in the United States are saying, that's not my business. I don't have anything to do with it. We told you what was going to happen. We said, let's stand next to you. Let's march together. Other women and certain group of women chose not to listen to what we had to say. Now they are going to be affected by this signing to dismantle this EEOC of 1965. Now, when we look at that, the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965, let me highlight again what it says. Title VII applies to private employers, labor unions, and employment agencies. The act prohibits discrimination in recruitment, hiring, wages, assignment, promotions, benefits, discipline, discharge, layoffs, in almost every aspect of employment. Not only are we concerning ourselves about the unemployment rate, but also about the minimum wages. Now, for those of you who are saying, well, you know what, we don't even get paid the same. We already know that Asians, Hispanics, African Americans, as well as women do not get paid the same amount as white men. Now there is nothing to hold them accountable for if this actually follows through and say, listen, we would no longer have this. Now, before we move on to discuss that, let's talk about some of the inherited factors versus the achieved factors of previous presidency for Trump's presidency, so that we can have a comparison, right? We heard before that, oh, when he comes in, he's going to change everything, it's going to be better, make America great again. He is changing everything. I still am questioning, when was America great again in certain aspects for people who look like me, because we clearly did not have that before, hence the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965 and the need for that, right? And he's going to make everything great again for whom? For whom? So when it comes to inherited factors as it relates to unemployment and jobs, unemployment rate, jobs, and everything else, much of the economic momentum pre-pandemic was a continuation of the recovery from the Great Recession, and that Great Recession was from 2007 to 2009. Employment growth, when we think about it, it began during the Obama administration with steady monthly job creation and a declining overall unemployment rate. Again, a declining overall unemployment rate. When it comes to structural improvements, long-term improvements in education access, workforce participation, and job training programs, it basically led the groundwork for gains in minority and women's employment. Did I just say minority and women? Aren't those the main groups of the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965? Those groups that I just said going to be affected by this executive order. Now, those were inherited factors when Trump came into office. However, what he achieved during that time, it was pro-growth policies. The policies that he had enacted during his administration, such as tax cuts, right? Tax cuts and job acts of 2017 and deregulation, which boosted business investment and hiring. It boosted business investment and hiring. These policies arguably helped sustain economic growth and contributed to low unemployment rates across various demographics. They did. We did acknowledge that. We acknowledged that African Americans had a record low during that time. We acknowledged that Hispanics' unemployment rate fell during that time. We acknowledged that women unemployment rate fell during that time. Yes, I will give them that. But now I'm really concerned because since Trump has signed on his first day all these executive orders, and one of them was basically about the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. Let me see if I can find anything else while I am speaking to you all about what occurred with Trump. I don't want to take up much of your time, but we may have to revisit this a little later. But let's pause for a second. Now, didn't I just say that he had policies such as tax cuts and job acts of 2017? Remember these tax cuts. Does anybody else remember the tax cuts and how everyone else was so excited to hear about these tax cuts? And when it comes to the tax cuts, right, it was supposed to be supposedly to help us with the wage growth. When we think about this, during his presidency from 2017 to 2021, the real median wages experienced modest growth. When we think about it, the anticipated substantial increases that he spoke about, particularly following the 2017 tax cuts, did not materialize as projected. What happened? For those of you who are not aware, there was a study. There was a study by Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, and it found that the real median wages grew only by 0.09% in the 2 years following the tax cuts compared to the 2 years prior. Yes, we have to compare. Remember, this is about based on the numbers, and we're bringing receipts for it. So if anyone comes in and says, wait a minute, the tax cuts The 2017 tax cuts that was implemented during Trump's presidency was a hit. Was it really? Because according to what we researched, it was only a 0.09% growth. And everybody, including myself, was very excited. I'm like, okay, let's see what this president is going to do. He said that we will be able to bring in an additional $4,000 a year, right? Because of these tax cuts. And we were still waiting. Let me put this in perspective for those of you who say, I do not feel like pulling out this calculator while I'm listening to this podcast, as well as I do not feel like trying to wreck my brain with figuring this out. Let's make it simple. If you were bringing in $1,000, that's only a 90 cents increase. What are you going to do with 90 cents? What are you going to do with 90 cents? We already talk about income inequality, because the income inequality continued to grow during Trump's presidency, accelerating at a faster rate than during any previous 5 administrations. Yes, again, I'm going to circle back around. He is noted as having record low unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanics, and women during a certain period of time of his presidency. However, the income inequality grew. And now that he has this executive order that he's trying to dismantle the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965, it may grow even larger. Let's see what this says. Trump's rolled back 1965 executive order. He rolled back a lot of things in addressing workplace discrimination. He also orders all federal diversity, equity, and inclusion workers to be placed on leave. I mean, if the list goes on and on, he's trying to roll back quite a bit. And again, rolling back the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. Think about this. Now, we already acknowledge that the income inequality was widened during Trump's presidency. Let's discuss the national minimum wage. Right now, the national minimum wage is $7.25. It's been a while since we had an increase in the national minimum wage. The national minimum wage has not increased since 2009. However, I can tell you this, a lot of the one percenters' wages have increased since then. So for those of you who are not aware of the minimum wage and when that occurred, the 1996 amendments increased the minimum wage to $4.75 in October of 1996 and to $5.15 an hour in September of 1997. The 2007 amendments increased the minimum wage to $5.85 per hour, effective July 24th. I want to say 24th, but I know it was July of 2007. Then it went to $6.55 an hour, July of 2008. And last but not least, $7.25 an hour, July of 2009. But let's check this out for a moment. If you recall, Scott Bensent is President Trump's pick to serve as Treasury Secretary. There was a sit down. You know how whenever someone is appointed or needs to be picked, he or she has to sit in front of the powers that be. And I recall Scott Bensent telling Senator Bernie Sanders that the minimum wage is more of a statewide issue. And he believes that it should not be increased. Let's take a step back. We are talking about not increasing the minimum wage. We are talking about pulling back the Equal Employment Opportunity of 1965 that will affect recruitment, hiring, wages, assignments, promotions, benefits, discipline, discharges, layoffs, and almost every aspect of employment. Are we giving the green light to some people to say in our faces, I do not want to hire you because of the color of your skin, or I do not want to give you a pay increase because of the color of your skin. I do not want to hire you because of your gender. And I do not have to be held accountable. And if I want to pay John Smith $150,000 a year for this role and pay Bahiyah Shabazz $75,000 for this role, I am within my right to do so. That's what it sounds like. You tell me, how do you feel about this? How are you feeling and what are you looking forward to during this administration as it relates to the unemployment rate, as it relates to the minimum wage, as it relates to pulling back the Act of 1965? Now you may say, well, by here I could care less about the minimum wage because where I live, I earn more than the minimum wage. That may be true. But do not forget that Trump is trying to roll back the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965. For those of you who are wondering which states actually pay the minimum wage, I have a whole list for you. Do you want to hear it? Here it goes. Let's read off these states that are at a minimum of $7.25 an hour to pay their employees. What type of quality living are you going to have with $7.25? You definitely may barely survive, but you definitely would not be able to thrive. The states are Alabama, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, New Hampshire, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Now, you may have some business owners argue that an increase in wages will take away from their bottom line. I'm a business owner myself. I get it. We want to look at that net income, also known as net profit. We want to look at that. However, we have to think about if we take care of our team will take care of us. You may have some people that say, well, the businesses may go out of business because they cannot afford it. Or they may get rid of some of their employees just so that they can compensate and pay for the increase in wages to some of the existing employees that remain. Now let's take a step back, right? And think about let's take one of the times that the wages increased. Wages increased, as I said, to $4.75 in October of 1996. The unemployment rate in September of 1996 was 5.2%. The GDP was 2.5%. GDP, remember, total output of services and goods, people spending their money. Now, keep in mind, if people have an increase in wages, that's more disposable income for them to go out, which will lead to higher demands of goods and services. It's potentially boosting economic growth. But you don't hear me, though. You do not hear me. Now, let's take one step back. So remember, the unemployment rate in 1996, September 1996 was 5.2%, GDP 2.5%. Let's go an entire quarter. Let's go as a matter of fact, let's go to the beginning of 1997, after the salary increase, so that we can gauge to see how well the economy was doing. The unemployment rate increased by 0.1% in January of 1997. So it went from 5.2 to 5.3. However, the GDP increased from 2.5% to 4.4%. That means that the more money people earned, the more they were spending. So for others to say, well, wait a minute. If we increase the wages, more businesses may go out of business. That's not necessarily true. You may not necessarily have a higher unemployment rate either, because in 1998, the employment rate dropped to 4.3. The unemployment rate dropped to 4.3. It balanced out. Come on, people. Now, again, we are drastically concerned with the potential of pulling back the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965, because that's going to factor in the ability to purchase homes, acquire employment, to have a decent living. And we're not just talking about homes and employment. We're talking about a plethora of things. We're talking about admission in school. We're talking about just your daily living of coming up to any type of vendor to see if you can be serviced, and someone really pulling themselves by the collar and saying, listen, I do not have to serve you. I do not have to patronize you. I do not have to work with you. The list goes on and on of the things that they could say. I do not have to pay you what I know you're worth, although you've gone to school for all those years and have acquired a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate. I can pay you what I want to, because there's nothing that's going to hold me accountable. What type of administration are we going to encounter? It's going to be a little different. Now it sounds like that Trump has full range to do what he wants to do. Did you see the inauguration and the people who were standing next to him? That inauguration did not look like a true United States of America. It was not truly a melting pot. If we talk about melting pot, it's a melting pot of emotions. Some people are happy, elated, sad, distraught, confused. That's the melting pot. Discouraged, encouraged. Depends on who you're speaking with and what the topic is. But I tell you this, just like you're listening to this podcast and I'm providing you some of these numbers, please continue to do your research and challenge. Challenge. Do not just take things for granted and just listen to what people have to say, because we will hear over and over again, certain people in this administration are going to say things based off a hunch or how they feel, as opposed to doing their research and saying what they actually know. We're going to have to figure it out. So when it comes to jobs and justice, are we actually going to have jobs and justice over the next 4 years? You tell me. How are you feeling about the possibility of no longer having the Equal Employment Opportunity Act of 1965, as well as the discussion to not increase the hourly wage from $7.25, as well as when we talk about the national unemployment rate, how it is extremely low, and we acknowledge that, but when it comes to subgroups, it's still a little higher. So it sounds like this administration may not go above and beyond to ensure that we have equality for all. I'm a little concerned, everybody. Tell me your thoughts. If you're able to share your comments, please do so below. Until next time, everybody, this is your episode of Based on the Numbers. We'll come back to visit you to have more discussions. I already know that we're going to have a plethora of topics on Based on the Numbers. We're going to be hit so many times with what's going on with this administration. We're just going to have to sit together and have a discussion. Let's have a family discussion about this. But share your thoughts, right? And again, I am not on anybody's side. I am neutral. I'm just here to share the facts, just here to present the numbers, everybody. And you make the decision that you need to, primarily based on the numbers. I'm your host, Bahiyah Shabazz. Have a great one, everybody.
Wanna learn about economy, financial responsibility, breaking down the numbers. We've got you covered.